For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Hello and welcome to a presentation on the great controversy, the battle for your choice. This is the 7th presentation in this series and is entitled Cry Freedom. I want to remind you about the book, The Great Controversy, on which many of these thoughts in these presentations are based, and encourage you to try and get it and read it. I also want to remind you that at the end of each presentation, there will be contact details about how you can get a free copy of the abridged or shortened version of The Great Controversy entitled The Great Hope. Okay, are we free or are we slaves? Read with me on the screen John 8 verse 32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The truth. Who is the truth? I am the way, the truth, and the life, says Jesus. What will make us free? The truth. What is the truth? John 14 verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is truth. Verse 33, they answered him, We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? What are we to be made free from? The Jews asked this very question. They said that they were not slaves and were free. Jesus said that they were not free, but were in bondage. Are we free or not? If not, what is keeping us from being free? The next verse will give us this answer. Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. Once again we see that it is the Son, Jesus, that sets us free. We can only want freedom if we realize that we are not free. Are you free or not? This is the question. Are you free? How we look at and define freedom defines whether we are free or not. Right now I want to consider if you are really free or not. Here is a circle. It is looking very pretty and colorful. In fact, it has 10 different colors. Each color could mean something different. You, however, are inside the circle. This circle can never, ever possibly be crossed. You are completely stuck and unable to go outside the circle. Forever, you will be inside the circle. You have no choice to go inside the circle, as well as no choice to go outside of the circle. You have no choice. Are you free? Are you free if you cannot go inside the circle because you're already inside it, and you cannot go outside of the circle either? I'm sure that most people would agree with me that you are not free. If someone has always been outside the circle, is he free? I'm going to be giving quite a few scenarios talking about this concept of freedom, because this is the heart of the issue. What if that person outside the circle cannot get into the circle? Is the one outside free? What I have just described removes all freedom, because you have no choice in the matter. You have no choice, and so are no longer a free moral agent. Remember, an intelligent being with the ability to choose for yourself. What I've just described in both cases is a robot, an automaton, a machine with no freedom of choice, no freedom. I'm sure that most of you would agree with me that it is obvious that the person outside the circle is more free than the person inside the circle, even though both cannot choose where they want to be. Okay, here's another scenario. Are you free now? Here's the circle again, this beautiful looking circle with 10 pretty colors. Now consider this. Are you free if you are inside the circle that you can cross? You have the choice to cross it, or the choice to remain inside. Yes, you can cross it, but you may not cross it. Who is more free now if you can go outside of the circle, but the one outside cannot go back inside the circle once he was outside? Well, once again, just mathematically and geometrically speaking, the one inside the circle now has more area that he can access than the one outside the circle. The one inside the circle also has more choices than the one outside of the circle, as the one inside can decide to go outside or remain inside. But the one outside cannot choose to go back inside. Let's look at another scenario. Are you free now? I'm sure that by now you are saying to me that true freedom is being inside the circle with the choice to go outside the circle, as well as the choice once you're outside the circle to be able to go back into the circle. And this scenario would be the ultimate true freedom available to you. Do you agree with me? And I'm sure you would agree with me that that's the ultimate freedom that we'd look at in these scenarios. I'm, however, going to give you another scenario. And before I start this scenario, I just want to ask, do the effects of a choice take away freedom? Now let's consider this other scenario. Do the effects of a choice take away your freedom? We saw in the presentation 1 and 2, that to have true freedom of choice, you must be a free moral agent. That is, the intelligent being with the ability to choose either a positive choice or a negative choice. And so you can choose the effect of that choice. If you take either the free choice away, or if you take the effects of the choice away, that person is not free. Once again, he has no freedom of choice, because what he has chosen by his choice does not happen. And so he did not choose it. If you take the penalty or the consequence or the wage of the choice away, you are no longer a free moral agent. So, keeping this in mind, are you now free if you are inside the circle that you can but may not cross and can never go back into if you have crossed the second scenario we just spoke about a little while ago, and there is a very painful effect of crossing over the circle? These effects would include pain, suffering, and death. The effects of choosing to stay inside the circle would include no pain, no suffering, no death. Can anybody guess what this beautiful circle with the 10 pretty colors is called? It is called a hedge. It is called the hedge of protection, God's hedge of protection. What is the hedge of protection? God's love. It's His character described. Yes, it is God's law, His law. You see, the law, God's law, is a hedge of protection to those inside the hedge. But the law is the most condemning thing there is for those outside of the law. How you view God's law depends on which side of the hedge we find ourselves. It either protects us or condemns us. Human laws are generally there to protect us. For instance, laws that set the speed limit of traffic are there to protect people and keep them safe. This is what is known as positive law. It could change according to the circumstances and place and location. This is arbitrarily set up by human beings for a seemingly good reason. The principles of God's moral law, however, is universal. That means it's everywhere. This means that no matter where you are in the whole universe, whether you are on Earth or on Mars or any other planet in the universe, even if you were in heaven itself, a moral law will always be binding and unchangeable in all free moral agents. What is God's law again? It is a transcript or a description of His character. It describes God to us, what He is like. It is love described, because God is love. When you read God's moral law, then remember that you are reading a description of love that is there to protect us and yet offer complete and true freedom. Okay, once again, this is not my analogy. I wish that I could say it was, but I took this quote from the author of The Great Controversy, and I just want to show you one or two quotes that she says. Man's happiness must always be guaranteed by the law of God. God's law gives us happiness. In obedience only can be found true happiness. The law is the hedge which God has placed about his vineyard. But by it, those who obey are protected from evil. And the second quote says, in obedience to God's law, man is surrounded as with a hedge and kept from the evil. He who breaks down this divinely erected barrier at one point has destroyed its power to protect him, for he has opened a way by which the enemy can enter to waste and ruin. We have just seen in the previous scenario that the effects of a choice do not take away freedom. You choose those effects. That is what makes you free to receive them. The next question then is, does the penalty of a choice take away freedom? Are you free if you are inside something that you can cross, but may not cross, and there is a huge consequence or penalty or wage of crossing it? Everything has a penalty or a reward or a consequence or a wage. Let's look and see what are the penalties or consequences of staying within and outside the hedge of protection. What is the penalty? What is the penalty of staying inside the hedge of protection? I've used the word penalty for a very specific reason. Yeah, we've always associated a negative connotation with penalty. It's the consequence, it's the wage. But I've left it as penalty. The penalty, the wage, the consequence of staying inside the hedge of protection is eternal life. What would be the penalty, the consequence of staying outside the hedge of protection? The penalty, the reward, or the consequence is eternal death. Who gives this penalty? It's the law. The lawgiver himself. It is God himself that has given this penalty. Who chooses this penalty, the reward, the consequence or wage? Who chooses it? The free moral agent does. Yes, he does the choosing of what effect and penalty he wants, because that is the definition of freedom of choice. It's the definition of a free moral agent. He has the freedom to choose positive or negative, and by that choice he is choosing both the effects of that choice and the penalty of that choice, either positive or negative. So, who is responsible for this choice? We are responsible for our own choices. Otherwise, we are not free moral agents. And remember, in our previous lectures, we spoke about choices. Your choices decide your habits decide your lifestyle decides your character, and your character decides who you are and your destiny, where you end up, either positive or negative. Okay, we're going to briefly look at two governments and two types of freedoms. This is what the Great Controversy is all about, how God runs his government and how Satan runs his. Almost everything you see happening around you here on this planet, all the pain, the suffering and death, this is all a demonstration of Satan's government and how he would run things in the whole universe if he was in charge. Satan's definition of freedom then is that true freedom is found in going outside the hedge and at the same time not having the effects and the penalty of that choice. This is impossible, as it removes all freedom of choice. This is having your cake and eating it. God's definition of freedom then is that true freedom is found by staying within the hedge of protection. This is obedience to his laws. True freedom then allows you to make the choice or decision, but it does not remove the effects of the choice or the penalty of the choice, but allows you to choose the effects and penalty you want. A law must have a penalty, positive or negative, otherwise it is not a law. If you take away either the choice to keep the law or not to keep the law anyway, or if you take away the penalty of the law, you are no longer free to choose the reward. And thus the choice has been removed from you, and you are no longer a free moral agent. God's law is a hedge of protection. We will see in the next presentation that this is exactly what the great controversy is all about, this cosmic battle between good and evil. It is all about God and His law. Satan, we will see, claimed that God was unfair by restricting people inside God's law, this hedge of protection. And if they were to go outside of it, they would have the effects as well as the penalty. And this God's law, His government, and yes, God Himself were harsh, severe, and arbitrary. We will see in the next presentation that this is completely untrue, and that nothing about God, who is love, is harsh, severe, or arbitrary. Remember that God is love, and that love is life, and this God is life. Life is the opposite of death, and it is just so simple that anyone can understand that life cannot be made death, and that death cannot be made life. They are life and death opposites. We will see that this is life and death opposites, but Satan wanted to force God to make life equal death. As we will see, this is impossible. So are you free inside of the hedge of protection? Some say yes, some say no. Outside, I find that we have no freedom. And I'll show you why I believe that we have no freedom. Once you are outside the hedge, you cannot choose to sin because you're already there. Once you are outside the hedge, you cannot choose not to sin because you have already sinned. The choice is taken away. We have to sin. It's our natures. It's in our propensities. Remember, we spoke about the natures and propensities. It's what we have to do. We are slaves to sin. Paul in the book of Romans and Galatians speaks about being slaves and sold under bondage. Yes, we are sold under bondage. This, in the condition we find ourselves now, is natural. So, you choose. This is what the great controversy is all about. How God runs His government and how Satan would like to run his. How we view and define freedom will be a deciding factor in which side we want to join. Do we see ultimate freedom as Satan does, freedom to do as we please, but without the penalty? God's definition of freedom then is that of true freedom, which is found by staying within the hedge of protection, His law. This is obedience to His law. His law is a hedge of protection. I just want to show you on the screen the two ways of viewing God's law. A hedge of protection, and Satan's government says, no, it does not protect us. It is a hedge of restriction. And it's your choice. You decide how you are going to see God's law, the description of love itself. Do you see it as a hedge of protection or a hedge of restriction? Sin removes all freedom. Who is outside of the hedge? The answer? Everyone. This includes you and me. We've all been outside the hedge of protection. So the critical question then is this. Is it possible to get back into the hedge? Is it possible to go against the sinful nature? Can a leopard change its spots? This is one of the questions asked in the Bible. This is the most critical question a person can ask. Can I be saved? And if so, how am I saved? How can I get back into God's government? as we study further, we will find the answer to this critical question. The only way back in, the good news, which is the gospel, which we've been talking about, is that there is a door back in. The impossible has been made possible, but there is only one, and I repeat, only one way back in. Only one. Yes, I repeat, only one way. John 10 verse 9 says, I am the door, by me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. And John 14 verse 6 says, Jesus saith unto him, I am the truth and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. This door, or the way in, is called the way of the cross. And this is what we will be looking into in the next presentations. So what is the name of the hedge again? It is called a hedge of protection. It is called love. It is called God Himself. It's Him describing Himself to us. It is called God's law, which is a description of God, or a transcript of His character. The word transcript, and I looked it up in a dictionary, means a written or printed version of material originally presented in another medium. This is also called the circle of life. The circle of life. Love is the circle of life. Okay, so we've just looked at the names given to the circle of life. Not to love means suicide. Freedom allows free choice, and you can choose to be inside or outside of the hedge of protection. What is suicide? Suicide is when you choose knowingly to do something that takes your life and saves or helps nobody in the process. If you do not know that this choice leads to death, then it is not suicide, then it is just death or murder or ignorance or something else. However, after listening to what I've just said, you now know what the effects of being outside of the hedge of protection is. And you will now knowingly be committing suicide if you decide or choose to stay outside the hedge of protection. My plea is, please come back into the circle of life, back into obedience to God's law. This is what these presentations are all about, allowing you to choose to get back into the hedge of protection. In our first presentation, we saw that we cannot even describe God. His law is the closest that we will be able to describe and understand God, love, as it is a description and transcript of His character. Just like love is the closest that we could ever try and define God, the closest description that we humans can and have of God is His law and love. God is love, His law is love. God is His law, and it is a transcript of His character. God is love, His law is love. God is equal to His law. Therefore, His law is love. God's law describes God's love, and the law describes God. God's law is a transcript or description of His character. I'm going to very briefly go through this to prove it from the Bible. This is a description of God. This is a description of love, His law. In 1 John 4 verse 8 we read, God is love. In Matthew 22 verse 37 to 40 we read, His law is love. God is spiritual. 1 John 4 verse 24, Romans 7 verse 14 says His law is spiritual. God is truth. His law is truth. God is righteous, 1 Corinthians 1:30. Psalms 119 says His law is righteous. God is holy, Isaiah 6 verse 3. His law is holy. God is perfect. His law is perfect. God stands forever. His law stands forever. You can check these references on the screen for yourself later. God is good. His law is good. God is just. His law is just. God is pure. His law is pure. God is unchangeable. His law is unchangeable. So, what is God's law? We will look into this quite a bit in the next two presentations. But in the Bible, God's law is referred to by various names, and David in the Psalms, particularly Psalms 119, refers to God's law, using no less than 7 names to describe God's law. And we'll just show you those names. They described from specific to less specific. And if you ever get a chance, take your Bible, open Psalms 119, take a different colored pens. Each time you come across one of these names, just underline it. Law means the same as commandments, the same as precepts, the same as statutes, judgments, testimonies, thy word. This is using the King James Version. The law is used about 25 times, the commandments about 21 times, precepts 21 times, statutes 22, judgments 22 times, testimonies 20 times, thy word 34 times, all variations over 160 times. If anybody loved God's law, it was David. Do you love God's law? A description of God. To understand God, we must understand love. And to understand love, we must understand God's law. All God's laws are given on the basis of who He is, love. When He gave us love, He gave us Himself. So He gave us His law. When He gave us His law, He gave us life, His love. In our next presentation, we will be looking into how and why the very first choice to step outside of the hedge of protection happened, and why we are currently outside the hedge of protection, outside of God, outside of love and His law, outside of life itself. Friends, I now, however, want to remind you that we are in a cosmic battle called the battle between good and evil, the great controversy, and this battle is all about the battle for your choice. Right now, I want to invite you to make some choices with me, which are based on this presentation. The first choice for today, then, I invite you to choose, so you can choose for yourself. I invite you to choose today. Does sin bring freedom or take away freedom? Only you can choose that. You need to choose that for yourself. Does love maintain freedom or take away freedom? Do you see the hedge of protection as a hedge of restriction or freedom? And the last choice, choose to see that there's absolutely no arbitrariness, harshness, or severity in God, because God is love. You choose. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, God bless and goodbye.